Thanks very much. Well, there's a memorable ditty. She'll be whistling that one on the way home. So I tried an experiment. Tried writing a piece of music with absolutely no melody at all. Well, actually, it's sort of 10% melody and 90% attitude, I guess. Or actually, maybe that one's 20% melody and 90% attitude. Anyway, it's a new tune called Yo. And it's on, just came out. Yeah, it's a real departure, I guess, for almost any kind of style of guitar playing. It's not really finger picking, and it's not really flat picking, and it's not really any identifiable guitar style. It's this weird sort of hybrid thing. It's basically a rock and roll kind of thrash kind of approach to fingerstyle guitar playing, for lack of a better explanation. And everybody always wants to know what tuning things are in, and I almost never play in standard tuning anymore. I I guess I'd been playing since I was so young that I got bored of it a while back, and I just stopped using it. So here it is. I'll write it down. There's the tuning for that piece. Now, it looks a little odd. The bottom string is tuned a fifth lower than normal, which means you have to have not a light string on there. And so yeah, the bottom string is tuned all the way down to an A, and then the A string is an octave higher than it. So what's interesting is you get this almost like impossible sort of 12-string guitar effect on the bottom of the guitar. Like this. So sometimes what I do is, for effect, I actually use that as to reinforce the low bass line. I reinforce it with the upper octave, like in this section. You know, it's got this interesting sound. It almost sounds as if there's an octave pedal kicked in just on the bottom string or something. And I do that a lot. I use a lot of octave tunings within the normal course of the guitar, without using odd strings or anything. Just go for this big, wide open octave sound in the middle of a tuning. So just a very tiny touch of what the theoretical background is to some of the tunings, why I chose to do them in that tuning without this becoming a theory lesson. And at any time, if you have any questions whatsoever, any at all, please raise your hand. And no question is stupid. Yes? Okay, right now the bottom string that's tuned to the A is a regular medium gauge string. It's a 56 thousandths of an inch on the bottom. I have a new guitar now made by a builder named Oscar Graf. It's a 7-string guitar. I've been doing so many of these very low tuning pieces lately that I decided, well, okay, I'll finally get a custom-made guitar together, and I'll make it a 7-string. So it's full-time tuned down to at least an A, sometimes down to a G, even down to that note. And of course, it's got a real gigantic string on the bottom. It's got a 66 on the bottom, so that the tone is really true. What happens with a guitar that's a regular sort of medium gauge string like this, I mean a string that's this medium gauge, is that if you hit the string too hard, it'll wow sharp. Get that bit of that problematic kind of thing happening. So with a thicker string, that's less of a problem because there's more tension on the string. Any other questions about that? Okay, is the neck reinforced? Well, the Loudon guitars, which is what this is, they always reinforce the neck. They don't make them adjustable because their feeling is that you shouldn't ever have to adjust it. And I've had this guitar for 15 years and I've never had to adjust it. So I use a lot of very wide open tunings, like everything down to an A or up to an F on the bottom string. So it's quite a big change in tension there. And it's the same with a lot of the strings. There's a new piece that I tune the A string down to an E flat. So it's a tritone flat. And then there are other tunings where I tune it up to a B. So the strings have to, well, I have to have pretty fresh strings on there every show, and sometimes every set, depending on how much aggression I get out in the first set. I'll talk for a little while about some tunings that don't stray too far from standard. Strangely enough, this one, even though it looks pretty alien at first, you'll see all I've really done is I've lowered that bottom string, and then strings 2 and 3. These two are each tuned down a little bit. The B down to an A, that's not such a big deal. But the G down to an E is a bit of a drag because the G is under a lot of tension. It's a very thin wound string. So unless your string's brand new, tuning it down to an E and then back up to the G, very often you break it. So if you're going to start experimenting a lot with non-standard tunings, it's always good to stock up on strings. It's just a good idea in general. Also makes you have good tone most of the time, good intonation. I'll look a little bit at some tunings that are a little bit on the more familiar side, and then some variations on those. So what I'd like to look at first is good old open G and open D. How many people here have never, ever played in anything but standard tuning, just out of curiosity? Okay, a lot of you have experimented. Okay, how many of you have never acquainted yourself with the open chord tunings like open G or open D? Just don't be ashamed. If you haven't tried it, just let me see. I'm just curious. Okay, so a lot of people have experimented with open chord tunings, what are called open tunings. There's a sort of a general catch-all category. That's the altered tunings, anything that's not standard, right? And then more specifically, there are sort of subcategories, one of them being the open tuning, which means that you tune the strings to an identifiable chord, usually a triad, usually a three-note chord, like the first, third, and fifth note of a scale. So let's look at one of those. A very familiar one that a lot of you have probably tried is open G tuning. There's standard tuning, E, A, D, G, B, E. Now, how do you go about, anybody, how do you go about actually changing the standard tuning into something that we call open G? What's your first step? Anybody? Yes? Okay, why? Why would you drop both E's to a D? Okay, why is it D, G, D, G, B, D? Okay, good. Okay, sorry, I'm sort of working backwards. Right, okay. So it's good to know, it's good to memorize some of the common triads that you'll be tuning into. Even if theory makes you swoon, or a theory puts you to sleep, it's good to know a few triads just so you can actually really easily retune your guitar. So a G major triad is G, B, D. What that is, it's the first, third, and fifth notes of the G scale. Right? G scale is G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp. So G is the first note, B is the third note, D is the fifth note. So with that in mind, that G, B, D sound, we want to make all 6 strings in the guitar agree with one of those notes. But I mean, each of the 6 strings should agree with at least something there. All right. So this fellow right here, your name? Paul. Is that Paul Cumhart? With a beard. Oh my God. Haven't seen you in a long time. Sorry. Old friend. The bottom string, Paul was saying we should lower from an E to a D, and why is that? Why not up to a G? It's closer. That's a good reason. Sort of the rule of thumb is usually you want to tune down. Okay. The strings are usually manufactured to be tuned to pitch as sort of their highest note. Okay, if you're going to tune above that, you take the risk of breaking the string. So usually the best idea is to try to tune down. It's as simple as that. So what we did was we took the bottom string and tuned it down to a D. What do we do with the string that is the note A? Do we leave it or change it? Anybody? Change it. Okay, to a G. So it's downwards to the nearest note that corresponds to the triad. It's also a very good idea somewhere in the bottom end of the tuning, either the 6th string or the 5th string, to have the first note, the root of the chord, represented, so that it sounds like a good strong voicing with a nice low tonic bass note. Okay, understood? If you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask. 3 in a row that we don't have to touch. So essentially, there's a little G chord right there in standard tuning already, right, on strings 2, 3, and 4. And then the top string, the E, what do we do with it? Down to D, okay, just like you did with the bottom E string. So there we have it. That's called open G. So from low to high, it goes D, G, D, G, B, D. D, G, D, G, B, D. And I'll pretend I was in standard tuning. Here's my top string. Okay, we'll start from string number 1 over on the right side. So down from E to D. Right? We leave our B alone. The G, of course, I don't have to touch because it's already at G. Right there, G, B, D, those top 3 strings are the G triad. So you should be able to identify the G chord, the sound of it. There it is, 1, 3, 5. Then the D string, of course, doesn't have to move. Just have to make sure it's in tune with the other D. The G. So can anybody tell me where is the root in that tuning? Where is it represented? The lowest root note. On the 5th string, okay? 1, 2, Remember, that's how you count guitar strings, from the thinnest one to the thickest one. So the fifth string has the G on it. So when you go to play this G chord, it's best to sound that string as the principal bass note. Okay? It's the so-called tonic. Then on the bottom string, you have another D, okay, which is the fifth of the triad, 1, 3, 5, G, B, D. All right. So you can find a lot of songs that you can do, say, a simple Travis picking pattern like this, and built right into the tuning is a voicing that gives you the sound that is good for a lot of folk music or a lot of country music or even a lot of pop songs. Use this kind of pattern where you get tonic, then the high 5 in your thumb, so it goes 1, 5, and then low 5, then high 5. So that sound, it's almost like the umcha boomcha bass line, right? Then in the offbeats in between, you can just pick the higher strings with whichever fingers you want and get a rhythmic picking pattern. All right? So it's as simple as that. Right there you have a G chord built right into the strings. Now why would you want that? Anybody? Why would you want to tune your guitar to a G? Paul? Yeah, it sort of gives you this sense of G-ness, I guess. It's like a good Japanese friend of mine from Tokyo, and he's a very good guitar player. And his English is pretty minimal, but he was talking to me about tuning one day, and he says, "This is so G." And it's just, yeah, it says it all right there. You had a comment, Gord? Yeah, yeah, open G tuning for Keith Richards, right? Honky Tonk Woman, right, and all that. Yeah, everything's an open G. But it's a very popular tuning. Every second Joni Mitchell song in the early days was written in G. People like Jorma Kaukonen, very fine guitarist who used to be in Jefferson Airplane, he writes a lot of pieces in G. And a lot of Crosby, Stills, and Nash. A whole lot of stuff is written in this tuning. And it's actually very simple. They're making a video of this, so I have to make sure I have this somewhere nearby. Does anybody know what the order of the chords is, going from chord number 1 to chord number 7, like whether the major and minor sequence and all that kind of thing? Can anybody just tell me? The chord number 1 is always in a major key. Major, right? Now this is a system I use that's pretty standard theoretical system where when it's a major chord you use bars on the top and bottom. And when it's minor you leave them off. Okay? 2 is minor, no bars. Okay? 3, 4, major, right? 5 is major, 6 is minor, and 7 is diminished. Yikes. That's why nobody ever plays 7 chords. So the easy way to remember it is that chords 1, 4, and 5 are major. Everything else is minor, okay? And 7 has even got the diminished fifth in it. Now, what does this mean? Well, to make a very long story short, when you take any major scale and you start building those triads, 1, 3, 5, 2, 4, 6, 3, 5, 7, etc., all the way up to 7, you end up with 7 chords that are each triads, and each of them will have a certain sound, okay? And the order that they appear in the major scale never changes, unless you make changes to the scale. But let's say instead of absolute terms, if you don't change anything, you'll always get this sequence. So in G major, what would these chords be called? Chord number 1 would be G. Chord number 2 would be A minor. 3 would be B minor. You just follow the scale and then you plug in the right major or minor. 4 would be C major, right? 5 would be D major. Okay. 6 would be E minor. And 7 would be the dreaded F sharp diminished. Or some people say F sharp minor diminished to designate that it's what's a so-called full diminished chord, meaning it has both a minor third and a flat fifth. Anyway, all right. What you really need to worry about, because like I say, well, not nobody, but 98% of all songs have never used a 7 chord in them. It's really important to learn 1 through 6. And when you're in an open chord tuning, the nice thing is The nice thing is that once you learn a couple of different finger positions, they work for all the different occasions that you'll need them. Okay? So let's try and leave this bottom thing on and look up here, and we'll just look at two basic left-hand finger positions that will give you all the chords you really need. Okay? How do you achieve the major chords, G, C, and D? Anybody? Right. Well, the open G, obviously, you don't even need to use the left hand at all, right? In fact, you could play an entire song without using your left hand if you knew any monotonous songs. So the chord of 1, you don't have to do a thing. Piece of cake. Chord of 4, you can just bar, okay, right across, basically, at the 5th fret, right? And then for chord number 7, you could bar right across at the 7th fret. Okay, simple. So here's 1. Here's the chord of 4. And the chord of 5. All right, blues, right? 1, 4, 5. Those are the 3 chords that you need to play almost every blues song ever written. Then, the chord of 2 will have a different look to it because you have to accommodate, whoops, I'll make that bigger. You have to accommodate the minor third. Okay? So one of the notes is going to change. So the thing to remember is that with open tunings, usually the thing that makes them so charming sounding is that a lot of strings sort of ring on through all the changes. All right? So it's okay that even if you'll end up with an open string that doesn't fit into the chord technically, sometimes as long as it's like the note 1 or the note 5 ringing through all the chords, it's got a very sweet sound to it. It ends up being a desirable thing, not a mistake. Okay, here's our 6 strings. Here's the 1st fret. Here's the 2nd fret. Now, the chord of 2, okay, we said that G was open. Okay, here's string number 5, that string that has the root on it. Where do we fret it for an A? 2nd fret, okay? Then we can get the 5th of the chord here, and then the minor third, okay, this, if I fingered it here, would be the major third, because that's where the third is in the chord voicing. Semitone. You got a minor chord. There's A minor. And what ends up ringing is this note here, which is G, and this note here, which is D. And remember our triad? G, B, D? 1, 3, 5. Well, remember I said if you let note 1 and note 5 ring through, it actually it's very pretty, and it works really well. Okay? So this is the only other chord voicing you need. This one will work for A minor, B minor, and E minor, but you have to, of course, move up the neck. So if you move this up to the 4th fret, if you move it up to the 4th fret, you get B minor. At the 2nd fret, of course, it was A minor. And then if you move it all the way up to the 9th fret, you get E minor. Okay, if you can read my chicken scratch. So I'll just illustrate that. Now what we've got is 6 chords that represent the first 6 changes in a major scale. Whoops. First 6 harmonic changes. And now you can accompany yourself or write a song or write a guitar tune, whatever you want. There's 1, G major. Here's 2, okay? Fret number 2 at the 5th string, fret number 2 at the 4th string, and fret number 1 at the 2nd string. Just like that, right? Here's A minor. So the A minor chord is where I'm fingering, okay? And I'm letting G and D ring. Because I said that's sort of part of the sound of playing in this tuning. Okay, move it up 2 frets, you get B minor. Right? Still with G and D ringing. Okay, bar across to get 4 because it's a major chord. Bar across to get 5 because it's a major chord. And then go back to that minor voicing to get the 6th chord, which is E minor. So here's fret number 9 here, fret number 9 on the 4th string, and then fret number 8 on the 2nd string. So I'll go through it in order. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right? Any questions at all? Clear as mud? Cool. Okay, now, I won't spend any time on it, but open D tuning, if you think about it, for those of you who have ever played in it, open D tuning is essentially the same chord voicing as open G, except the root is on a different string. Okay, what that means is this voicing for open G, remember the order that it was in? How do these things work? Here we go. It was D, G, D, G, B, D. Okay? And if you think of it in terms of the which note is which in the triad, from bottom to top it goes 5, 1, 5, 1, 3, 5. You get it? D, G, D, G, B, D is 5, 1, 5, 1, 3, 5. Okay? Open D. The way we arrived at it is that a D triad is D, F sharp, A. Right? That's the three notes in the triad. So we have to make all the notes agree. So the easiest way to do it is D, A, D, F sharp, A, D. Or what's called, sometimes people call it Vestipal tuning. So when you're at a guitarist cocktail party, you can impress everyone. Anyway, if we look at that voicing, what's the order? Anybody? Can anybody tell me? Using this 1-3-5 method? Good. 1, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1. Notice anything? If you can read that. Sorry, it's a little unclear. Okay, I'll write them underneath. Okay, G was 5, 1, 5, 1, 3, 5. D is 1, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1. Do you notice anything similar? Yeah, it's moved over essentially one place, right? If you look at it in the G tuning, the root is there on the second string. In the D chord, the root is on the bottom. So if you use that as the starting point for each voicing, just eliminate the bottom string in the G, you get 1, 5, 1, 3, 5. And the D starts out 1, 5, 1, 3, 5, right? That's what's so cool about the open tunings is that you can interchange, you can end up interchanging finger positions, okay? So all you need to do is to get into open D, which is not far from open G. Still has the D on the bottom. Here's the A. There's D again. Right? F sharp, so you tune your G down to an F sharp. Okay, the B goes down to an A. And the top string is a D. There's the open D chord. That's chords 4 and 5, the major chords. Of course, chord number 1 is open because it's major. Then chord number 2, instead of using the 5th string as the tonic, move it one string north to the 6th string and use the exact same finger positions. That's chord 2. There's chord 3. The names of the chords now are E minor and F sharp minor. Okay? Chord of 4 is G. Chord of 5 is A. They're both major. And chord of 6 is minor, and it's a B minor. Okay? There's our first 6 chords. If you want to be highfalutin and play the 7 chord, it's voiced like this. Okay, I have to incorporate the flat 5 here. There. So the whole scale is. Okay, tunes that use this tuning. Bruce Coburn's Sunwheel Dance off of one of his early records. Okay, etc. And all the songs, all the early songs by Joni Mitchell that were not in open G were in open D. So that's 2 open chord tunings that are very, very similar. Now, yes, question. Well, what I would tend to do is play fingerstyle and just not hit the open strings. Yeah, it's really sorry, the question was, how do you avoid playing those strings that ring through if you don't want them? And the simple answer is don't flat pick. Or if you're going to flat pick, just play single notes. Because it's problematic. They're sort of built in. As a kid, I always wondered why they put 6 strings in a guitar. You only have 5 fingers in each hand. But no, and then I ordered a 7-string. But anyway. Anyway, yeah, so the only way to sort of really avoid playing them is by playing fingerstyle and not playing those notes. But and that's easy enough if you're into fingerstyle playing. Another question. Right. Okay. Right. Right. Yeah. The question has to do with intonation problems on the G string when you go into this altered tuning, the open D, and yeah, it really changes from guitar to guitar, and even with compensated saddles and things like that, very often you just get a guitar that doesn't want to cooperate, or sometimes too, there's a whole. I mean, I could do a whole lesson just on tuning, like tuning in absolute sense. Our tuning system that we use, of course, I don't know how many of you have known this, but we tune our pianos and our guitars with frets on them and all this kind of thing. We tune them out of tune. Our tuning system is completely and utterly out of tune. The equal tempered system that we've only been using really for about 250 years is all out of tune with nature. Nature wants to get rid of all the beats that happen between notes that are slightly out of tune. It sort of wants your ear to be able to do that. And you can tune a violin like that and play with other string players and play instead of absolute pitch very easily because you've got infinite variety of pitch there. So you rely on your fingers a lot to tell you that you're in tune. With a guitar, everything's preordained, right? The frets are there. And it's the same with the piano. It's like once you get your piano tuned to equal temperament that we use, the only intervals that are kind of in tune are the octaves. And all the other intervals are the fifths, the thirds, the fourths. Everything is out of tune. But we've convinced ourselves into thinking it's in tune. So that is a bit of an aside talking about this problem of trying to be in tune with an open tuning. And the problem you're going to find is that you can sound great on your open strings, and then you go to play another voicing, and very often this note here, that what becomes an A now at the 3rd fret on the G string, what's now an F sharp string. If you compare that with the open string on the 2nd string, which you sort of used your ears to tune, notice how the note on the 3rd string seems flat. It's because it is. It's that simple. Okay, this guitar is like pretty rock solid. It's the intonation's very good on this guitar. It still sounds out of tune. All right. And it's the same in standard tuning. If you're in standard tuning and you tune thinking, okay, this song is in G, I'll tune to a G chord. You make a G chord sound like $1,000,000. You go to play an E chord and it sounds like poop, right? You've all had that experience, right? We've had to retune almost every single song a little bit, tweak it a little bit depending on what key you're going to play in. That's because our tuning system's out of tune. First time I heard that, I was shocked, but now I've come to live with it. There's nothing much you can do about it, right? If you're going to play Western music, so that's sort of a part of the problem too, Paul, is that the tuning system doesn't work really, but we've made it work. Okay, because nature is close to equal temperament. It's pretty close, but sometimes it's off by like cents, like quite like hundredths of a semitone. It's quite noticeable if you use your ears a little bit. You hear that it's not quite right. Another question, yes. That is a string that I was using to hold my strap on until last week, and I forgot to cut it off before we started shooting. So yeah, it improves the tone. It's a Tibetan thing. Now let me just show you very quickly a variation on open D, which is really cool, and that some of you maybe are familiar with. Yes, quickly. Sure. Sure. Okay. For example, if you wanted to play a progression, let's say you're playing a song. The question has to do with using the minor chords in the open D tuning, and that's a very good one because a lot of people will rely a lot on, because it's simple. Or when you're playing blues, you know, like you can sort of get away with using all those major chords, and it sounds cool because you're using the minor third chord, you're using the flat 7 chord. Especially if you're playing slide, you know, you've maybe had that experience where a lot of major chords work in certain styles of music. If you're going to start using the minor chords a lot, well, your song might be in open D, and it might be in the key of D. And maybe you have a bridge that goes to the relative minor, okay, which is B minor in this case. It's always the key, the relative minor key is always based on the 6th of the major scale. So here's 1, there's 7, there's 6. Your bridge might be based in B minor. And then you can go back into D very easily. And here's that bridge thing. See, right there I'm using the B minor, the E minor, and the F sharp minor as like 1, 4, and 5 in B minor, which is, you know, going to a whole other place with the song. So it's not difficult to do. If you just, you know, put the old thinking cap on a little bit and just think, well, okay, what is the relative minor? And oh, I've got 1, 4, and 5 in the relative minor available very easily. And that's how a lot of pop songs get written, right? It's just like you've got 7 chords that are sort of the basis of what you want to do, and, you know, sit on 1 a lot during the verses, and then the bridge go to 6, you know, and it's a nice departure. It sounds like the same key, but you've got a new tone center, and it's really kind of neat, right? A variation on open D, which is getting, well, it's been popular for a long time, but even a lot of people playing all kinds of styles of music have started to hook into it because it's very adaptable, is so-called dadgad. Okay, there's only the slightest difference between them, and it's obvious what it is. It's the note on the 3rd string. Now, what have we done by doing that? Anybody? Yes? Right. What you've done is you've taken away the majorness of the chord, okay? The 3rd in open chord tunings can be so much of a crutch that this problem comes up, this question came up, you know, about, well, geez, you know, even using the minor chords sometimes seems like a bit of a daunting task with an open major chord tuning. And it's true. Sometimes you get so locked into the modality, the tonality. D major is D F sharp A. This is essentially D G A, right? D minor is D F A. This is D G A. So there's no 3rd at all. You're using 1, 4, and 5 of D something. It could be D major or D minor. Let's look at that. So you're putting the G back to where it normally is. Okay? And now you've got this new tuning that everybody calls dadgad because of what the pitches spell. All right? And it's just as easy to play in D major as it is to play in D minor in this tuning. Here's D major, some D major moves. Right? And then D minor, you just start incorporating minor thirds and flat 6s. So it's actually it's kind of neat with major. Just think of like frets 2 and 4 are sort of like automatic major scale. In no particular order. And then with minor, it usually works out that it's 3-2 and open instead of 4-2 and open. Although you have to make some adjustments to that. But see, if you play 3-2 open on the second string, you get sort of a Dorian mode like that. So you might have to make one change. Oh, there too. Okay, and you can use the open strings as part of the riffs you're doing in both cases. So you're not stuck in major or minor. Questions about that? Okay. And with DADGAD, you just make slight variations on those chord voicings I showed you, and you can play in D major very easily by, instead of using bars for your major chords, you have to use something more like that minor voicing in the D major tuning, because now, and here's the 5, which is also major. And for the minor chords, instead of using this position, okay, instead of using it here, you'd move the 3rd a semitone lower. Okay? So here's 1, there's 2, there's 3, 4, 5, 6, the dreaded diminished chord, and back to 1. So that's major, and then minor is just as simple, really. 5 is minor, 6 is major, 7 is major, and back to 1 again. Okay? That's a very, very quick little condensed overview of DADGAD tuning. But it's a very available variation. And again, the nice thing is that you're not stuck in major or minor. And Pierre Bensusan, a very fine French guitar player, writes in this tuning exclusively. And he writes very lyrical pieces of music. Like, I don't really know it. There's a little lyrical section of one of his pieces. It's sort of like this. Try that again. Very approximately. It's a piece called Nice Feeling, and it's one of my favorite guitar tunes ever. It's very lugubrious and all over the place, and it's a magnificent piece of music, but he uses DADGAD tuning all the time. That's sort of his standard tuning. Yes, question? No, I sort of discovered Pierre a little bit late. I only sort of hooked into his music about 10 years ago. I started, the question was, did Pierre Bensusan influence my use of altered tunings at all? Influenced me that much, like, wow, look what you could do with this tuning. But I started actually getting into altered tunings pretty early on. Even when I was a kid and just sort of learning some first position chords, every once in a while, like say I'd tune the B up to a C to make a C chord really easy to get without having to finger anywhere, and then I could sort of use my fingers to do other things. So, you know, and then I'd make up little melodies with that C on that string. So it started off kind of early, but I guess it was when I'd been playing for about 6 or so years when I was a kid, I sort of got heavily into the altered tunings. Yes? I was about 8 years old, I guess. But yeah, and it's just been a matter of just playing all these years that has sort of, and being serious about it, you know. Yes? Okay, the question has to do with coming up with new voicings in DADGAD tuning instead of unusual chords. Well, there are kind of a few things you can do. I find that a really nice sort of catch-all thing that you can do is try this voicing where you simply do a partial bar, what's called a partial bar on the bottom two strings. Like, let's say at fret number 3, I'm barring now on just the bottom two strings. Okay, just with the top joint of my index finger. Then with my pinky finger, I'm reaching over and fretting on string number 4 2 frets higher than that. So I get this sound. What that is, it's like 1, 5, 9, all right, in any chord. You can sort of do it anywhere. And you get this sound, which is a really lovely kind of stack of fifths, you know, on the bottom. Then play the open strings above it. And in a lot of cases, you end up with some very rich sonorities. Like, for example, here at the 3rd fret here, F on this string, C, and then G, and then play the top 3 strings open. That's kind of an F6/9 kind of chord, all right? Take that same voicing, move it a semitone lower. That's a very rich chord. That's an E minor 11th chord, all right? Move that a semitone down. That is an E flat major 7th flat 5 chord. But it's a great chord, you know. That's really pretty. Move it up another 2 frets, you get a kind of B minor chord. You know, you've got that open G kind of giving you that weird sort of flat 6 sound. And then you can sort of try extending that a little bit. Instead of just going like from low to high 3 3 5 0 0 0, try going 3 3 5 5 0 0. Then you get this, and some more unusual voicings. And then there's a really great one though at the B. It's a B minor 9th. No, B minor 11th. B minor 9th. It's a very rich chord. Move that up a semitone to the 10th fret. You get a C chord, like a C, add 9. Yeah, C6/9. See, just with just one finger position virtually, all right? Right there, I just came up with a whole lot of voicings that are not in D major, for example. But you don't always have to be playing the 6 or 7 chords that are available to you if you never make a change in the scale. You can change the scale all you want. You can come up with new stuff. Why don't I take just a minute to play a tune for you, another new tune. This is in a kind of a neat tuning. And not very far from standard. Here's what it looks like. Now again, it's not major or minor. Can anybody sort of does anyone have a wild guess what you could call it? Sorry, yeah, E7, but where's the 3rd? There ain't none. So it's E7. I don't want to just call it that. So it's just got 1s, 5s, and flat 7s in it. Okay, 1 is E, B is 5 of E. All right. And D is flat 7 of E. So you automatically end up with kind of a rock blues kind of what's called Mixolydian modality. All Mixolydian means is 7 is flat. That's all it means. And it's like the most primal sound really that in Western music. It's like Irish, half the Irish jigs you've ever heard are in Mixolydian mode. Blues is in Mixolydian mode. Most of R&B and rock and roll is in Mixolydian mode, so it's a very, very familiar sound. And what I did, I wrote this new tune called Afraid to Dance. And I tried to combine that kind of rock and roll, R&B, blues sort of sensibility with what is essentially a hip-hop groove. I wanted to write a solo hip-hop guitar tune. And it also employs a lot of harmonic slapping, which is kind of fun. Harmonic slaps you can get fairly easily. They're not as hard as they look. Just by, this is the 12th fret here, you just slap the strings of the 12th fret. Okay, and you end up with these harmonics sounding along with a percussive slap. All right? They're pretty easy to get at the 12th fret, almost as easy at the 7th fret, and pretty hard at the 5th fret. Okay? I tend to stick to 7 and 12 because they're a little stronger. All right? So and at the beginning and end of the piece, you'll see I actually use my right hand as downbeats on the 12th fret. And then in kind of a very quick swing rhythm, like a lot of hip hop is, this sort of chook 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 kind of sound. On the offbeats, I'm slapping on 7 with my left hand. So it's a very sort of Thank you. Thanks very much. I'll take a question or two and then we can take a short break. Yes? Okay, the question is about percussive techniques when I'm not amplified. Yeah, we're going with all this wonderful outboard stuff, but even acoustically, that song really shouts. In fact, when I recorded it for the album, we just used mics, really. I mean, I was going through my outboard stuff here, a lot of this amplification stuff, into other tracks that we could mix into the sound if we wanted to, but that's maybe 10% of what you're hearing. 90% is just the pure acoustic sound. And it sounds very cool. Yeah. Do I compose amplified or not? Usually unamplified. Yeah. Another question? Yes, Paul. Yes, that's the question is, did the bass line of that one come first and then the melody, and that's essentially how it worked. I knew I wanted to do this, boom, very, very sort of corny, straight ahead R&B kind of bass line, and then get something almost going the opposite way. sort of like way up high, and then sort of put the period on the end of the sentence with that climbing bass line. So I'm working a lot with very groove-oriented writing these days, and also with writing that employs a lot of melody and bass sort of answering each other, which is really kind of fun. It ends up giving the sort of two guitar kind of illusion. Another question? Yes. Right. Okay. The question is about actually worrying about intonation with tuning. I mean, in terms of the notes being in tune with each other, sort of in nature, or do I use an electric tuner or whatever? And no, I don't usually use an electronic tuner on stage. I only do that if I'm playing with a band that I sometimes put together, and it's more important then because the bass player and the guitar player should be really in tune. And he's a fretless player too, so there's a danger that if his open strings aren't right on, he's going to have to change his intonation all over the place. So that then we rely on tuners, but. No, I rely very much on... The nice thing, too, about tunings like this, that especially the ones that don't have thirds in them, is that you can tune the ones and fives and stuff like that more in tune with nature, and they're medium gauge phosphors. That's what I use most of the time. Yes, in the back. Okay. Okay, yeah, great. Yeah, the thing I find about these is that apparently I've been told instead of being wound this way, they're wound this way. So makes them a little denser because gravity works on them. And it's weird. They for whatever reason, I mean, I'm no physicist, but that they do feel a little denser. They feel a little bit harder to play, but that's okay with me. I play really hard, so I like them to fight back. But they retain their tone longer, which is always the biggest problem for me. Okay, sorry, one more quickie. No, it's okay. You're sitting there, I'm standing here. Let's do it. Oh, I see. Okay, the question has to do essentially with that voicing of the top, the open D tuning. The question is, have I ever experimented with putting like the F sharp on the A string or something like that? And yes, I have. But the rule of thumb, usually when you're playing in altered tunings, is try to keep ones and fives on the bottom. Because if you put threes too low in the voicing, it gets very muddy and dark and weird sounding. The reason why is because the notes are so close together, and their harmonic series, like when you play a string, you're hearing a lot of harmonics at the same time as the fundamental note. So their series are so cluttered, and with bass strings, you really hear the upper partials really loudly. So when you start tuning, like I'll give you an example. Okay, there's the D and the F sharp in the bottom. Now just listen to how much sort of like, you'll hear a lot of beats and weirdness. It's very clashy, really, because the harmonics are always fighting against each other. No, I tend not to put thirds low in the voicing for that reason. It doesn't work on the piano, it doesn't work on the harp, it doesn't really work on the guitar. It doesn't work on any instrument. It's like even in bands where they use like a tuba trio or something. They're usually playing really big voicings that are far apart, because way down low like that you get a lot of clash of the harmonic series. Let's take a short break, and if you want to chit chat for 5 minutes or whatever, that's fine. Let's just take a real shorty, and then we'll finish up. Thanks. Here's the tuning for this one. Here's this tuning. Yikes. Any guesses what it is? Anybody have a name for it? Pardon me? Ooh, I'd never thought of that way. Let's see. That's I guess a possibility, although the F's awfully high to be the tonic. C minor what? C minor 11th. That's exactly what it is. Okay, for those of you who get spooked by the idea of what the hell is an 11th, an 11th is just the fourth note of the scale plus an octave. Okay, so 4 plus 7 makes 11, right? That's what F is in this tuning, okay? Because F is the fourth note of a C minor scale. So this is based on C minor. It's C on the bottom, okay? It's pretty low. E flat on the A string. This is the tuning I was talking about before, where the A string goes down a tritone to E flat. And then the next string is an octave higher than that. Okay, it's normally tuned to a D, so you have to tune a semitone sharp. That means that you are in string breaking danger. So make sure it's a new string. Then F, that 13th we were talking about. So strings 3 and 4 are only a tone apart. Then C again, and then D on top. Now D is what in C minor? 9, yeah. So an 11th chord usually should have a 7, an 11, but 9 is fun to throw in there as well. Okay, so technically a C minor 11 would be the 1, 3, 5 of C minor, C, E flat, G. Then the 7th is B flat, which you always have to have in there for the chord extension. Then the 9 is D, and the 11 is F. And you've got all that here except for the G. You don't have a 5 in this tuning, but that's, for those of you who have jazz theory, you know that 5 is one of the most expendable notes in the world. So you got to have your root, you got to have your third, and you got to have your 7th. That's most important stuff with chord extensions. Hard to get this one right in. This is the title track off my latest record for Columbia, and the song is called "This Dragon Won't Sleep," and so is the album. And it's a very groove-oriented thing in C minor. And when I wrote it, I actually wrote it here in Vancouver, but I was thinking about trucks going by your campsite at 4 in the morning when I wrote it, whatever that means. Thank you. Wow. Okay, what are influences? Right. Well, like a lot of guitar players, I guess, a lot of sort of new fingerstyle guitar players, I guess I listen to a lot of non-guitar music. It's kind of neat. Like, I've always been very interested in non-Western music, and use of odd meters and use of unusual tuning systems and all that kind of stuff. And there are a few other people. You can think of people like Hedges and people like Leo Kottke, maybe to a lesser extent, sort of heading in that direction as well. Like with Hedges and I, it's kind of interesting. We sort of discovered each other's music about, I don't know, 7 years ago, and he was do what he's doing, but it was just a very coincidental thing. And more and more, a very strong sense of kind of, I'm really attracted by, like, I'm half native, I'm half Micmac from the East Coast, so I've always been very, very intrigued by native music and the sort of the plodding rhythmic quality of native music, and also the pentatonic. Yeah, influences come from everywhere, but what I guess what makes my playing different is that I don't listen to a lot of other guitar players, so they don't enter into the music a whole lot. And I also sometimes write on the piano or I write on another instrument and then teach myself the piece. So that's very often where the tunings come from too, is that I don't say to myself, well, I'll write something in C minor 11th tuning today. That'll be the project. No, usually it's like I've got this idea, you know, what minor key would it sound good? Oh, you know, it's sort of nice with that C on the bottom, and then I'll work from there. And then with this song especially, this bass thing, you know, that was really attractive to me, and then doing it up here as well. Again, that's that independence of melody and bass, sort of right out of nowhere, you know? Yes? You haven't noticed how weird looking my nails are? It's ping pong balls and acrylic. Honest to God. Yeah, steel string players always run into the nail problem, especially when you play with a lot of attack like I do. The question comes from a classically trained guitar player, who, and of course classical players playing nylon strings usually have a slightly easier time dealing with nail care and all that kind of stuff. For years and years, I went to a beauty parlor and actually got acrylic nails, a very special form of acrylic nail applied, because they were super hard and would last for a couple of weeks without breaking. And so if I had to go on a tour or something, they were like, you know, I needed them so badly. But I think I started reacting, like after 7 or 8 years of using them, I started reacting to some of the things that they have in them. So I just do the tips now myself. And it's an interesting system that John Renborn showed me, where you just take a ping pong ball and you cut little tips, like tiny little 1/4 inch long tips, and you actually crazy glue them, believe it or not, to the bottoms of your existing nails. So just the very end of your fingernail has the glue on it. It's not actually on your skin or anything, or under your skin, and because that's the part I think I was having a hard time with. And then you buy this acrylic resin junk, and there's powder, and then there's this liquid activator stuff, and you get a little tiny paintbrush and you just dip it in the liquid, then you dip it in the acrylic, and then you brush it on. Just a light coat, and you put a little bit underneath as well. And I just do like half the nail, and then you wait about 15 minutes. It turns into rock, and then you take a file and you spend half an hour filing them to the right shape, and then you can do all this, you know, Pete Townsend kind of fingerstyle guitar, and not break your nails. You know, it's the only thing that works. I can't use my own nails and play like this. Just well, how long they last depends on how thick you make them and all this kind of stuff. I did these myself just about an hour before the workshop, and they'll probably be there still functioning in a week or two, you know, no problem. And this is certainly a lot cheaper doing it yourself. You can buy the kit for $20 and it lasts you a year, you know. So that's what I do for nails, and it's what a lot of professional fingerstyle players have to do. They have to do their own acrylic nails. Sometimes too, like there's a product called the Alaska pick now, which is about the closest thing to playing with your nails with a pick. You know. Another question? Was there? Yes. Okay. Does the guitar take a beating? Yes. This is a 15-year-old guitar. I've been sort of gigging full time for about 6 years, and this guitar has done every single gig. So it's put up with a lot of abuse, and I finally got a new one just like it, but I haven't taken it on the road yet. But yeah, the wedding ring sort of carves into a little hole here after a while. I had a piece of Mylar put on it so it wouldn't completely implode. I wore a hole in the top, sort of a Willie Nelson thing was starting, so a friend of mine just took a Martin pick guard and threw it on top. Other than that, most of the stuff in the guitar is original. I had a brass nut put on to add sustain to the open strings. So what was nice was that the bone nut that was there was starting to decay, and especially the B string was just sort of go, you know, it'd sort of sound like this, you know, and then it would die, you know, or yeah, this was it, yeah. But now it's hooray. And then the tuning machines all wore out because of what I do. So I had a set of Grovers put on about 6 years ago, and now they're toasty. But yeah, so the guitar does take a beating, yes. And you know, in my case, it's like I'm a professional player. This is my hammer, right? I mean, a carpenter needs a hammer, right? So it's like if it gets busted up or something, well, I'll get a new one, right? But I know a lot of guitar buyers, you know, they worry about resale value. They worry about how pretty it is. I can't worry about pretty or resale. You know, it's like this will be kindling in another 10 years, I'm sure. But one more quick question. Yes. Sorry, I know you've had your hand up a lot. Sorry, I should take a question from you. Orientation with a new tuning is a question. Yeah. Right. I've really gotten myself into it. What am I going to do with this tuning? Well, I think in terms of interval, always. That's how I do it. See, even when I play in standard tuning, I'm not always conscious of what pitch I'm playing, you know, especially if I'm playing along with somebody who's like, I don't know, a jazz horn player wants to jam an E flat. Thanks a lot, buddy. You know, so it's like you start trying to solo, and you think if you're worried about, oh yeah, okay, there's what is it, 3 flats, and if you start worrying about it, you can get really befuddled and get all mixed up. So I think in terms of interval and where intervals usually appear in relationship to each other, and it's the same thing with the unusual tunings like this. I think to myself, okay, well, there's this octave relationship here, right? There's this weird minor chord in the bottom. Again, I've sort of just broke the rule that I was talking about before about not putting thirds in the bottom of the tuning, and I just did it in this song. It's the first time I guess I've ever done it. But I don't really play them together very much. That's the thing. I do this. So they sort of form a line together, right? And then I know that there's this second interval in the top, which is kind of weird. And there's another second interval here between these two strings. So I think in terms of interval and try to utilize that for effect, you know. And this is just this 1-5-1 kind of feeling. So if you just move that up and down the neck, there's the basis of the melody for the whole song, right? And then, not exactly very brilliant, but anyway, it works, right? Okay, and then let's look at one more kind of weird. Oh, another thing, of course, I did in that song is I retuned twice during the song, which is something I've been toying with lately too, because the bridge of the song, like the song's in C minor, the bridge is sort of pedals on a B flat chord, that's 7 chord, and I wanted to get that on the bottom somehow. And before I got my 7-string guitar, the only way I could do that was to retune, and that's what happens. So I have really carefully have to go, you know, so to give yourself a whole beat to find it, sort of thing. So that's what the move is there. It's like. And then there's the B flat pedal thing. Takes a little rehearsal, but you can actually get it. Actually, you know where I first heard of somebody retuning in the middle of a piece was on a Christopher Parkening album. this album of sacred music he did back about 10 years ago. He does a version of Simple Gifts or Lord of the Dance, whatever you want to call it. And he plays most of the tune in drop D tuning in D. And then he does this effect where he starts playing really close to the bridge, and it sounds like a banjo because he wants to imitate a banjo at one point. But just before he does it, he tunes his D down to a C. And he does it rhythmically. He goes, yang gong gong, yang gong yo. And then he starts playing this quasi banjo thing. It's very cool, and I thought, gotta do that one day. So there, I copped off Christopher Parkening. Yes, one more question. Yes, you can. The question is about changing key during songs in alter tunings and things like that. Yeah, you can. You are just as free to do whatever you want in the alter tuning as you are in standard tuning. Really, when you talk about open chord tunings like open D, open C, open G, those kinds of things, there's a tendency to fall into traps with them. Yes, like rely a lot on the majorness of the chord or the minorness of the chord or whatever. But something like this that's very wide open. It's a big chord extension. You can take this to a lot of different places, and I actually have pieces of music that do modulate all over the place, but within, all playing in this strange tuning. Just because standard tuning is an arbitrary tuning, right? It's parallel fourths. Well, I mean, a stack of fourths, essentially, with 1/3. Well, essentially, that's a handicap, too, right? Because fourths are easy to get, and then thirds are a bit of a hassle. Fifths aren't so bad. Like certain intervals become easier to play than others. And also, there's within the standard tuning, there's that G major chord sort of built into it. There's sort of an E minor chord built into it. So you can find yourself getting like this is what a lot of my students say to me when they come to me. I feel like I'm hitting a brick wall, and they've been playing for 20 years, and it's just like everything's still in G or whatever. It's and they're still using the same voicings they've always used. So I think you can limit yourself in any way. But what I do instead of feeling limited is that I never play in the same tuning twice almost. Almost every single piece I've written has been in a different tuning. That's not just for the sake of it. It's a compositional tool, and it makes the guitar into something much bigger than it is. It's a small instrument. So if you're going to use it almost like a little orchestra or a little piano, the way a lot of people have called it, I think the best way to do that is to expand the horizon a little bit and get away from the relatively limited range, extend the range by retuning, and extend the harmonic vocabulary by introducing very strange and wonderful sounds like that as your open strings, So it's exciting, actually. I find it very exciting. And in my case, I've been doing it for so long that I feel like even after I've played the instrument now for 25 years, I still feel like every year I make such huge discoveries on the instrument, and they're mostly to do with actual compositional approaches, and so much of it just has to do with more experimentation, thinking of something I've never done before. Like, for example, I'll do things like this. This is what my new music is starting to sound like, the stuff for the next album. I might partial capo on the top 5 strings, for example, and get something like this. I get this interesting tuning where there's like this little tiny chord on the top, and then still with this low thud on the bottom, and then you can get into things like what's a good thing? Yeah. Again, you're sort of challenging yourself to do something very out. Pardon me? No. You understand why. But no, I think that especially with modal tunings, like tunings that do not have thirds in them, you can play in almost any key you want. Like, for example, that other tuning, the E, B, D, E, B, E, you could very easily play in G major with that tuning. You could play in A minor very easily. You could play in B minor super easy. You can play in D really easily. It can go a lot of different places. I'll take Dadgad and write in G. I've written a song in B flat that's in Dadgad. So you can go almost anywhere. You're just as limited in any tuning, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's your imagination that limits you, I guess. Yes. What tuning would I play Stella by Starlight in? I'd probably want to play it in standard first. because yeah, when it comes to like playing a really familiar tune, sometimes what I'll do is I'll work out an arrangement using standard tuning as sort of a place to start from. And then if I feel like there's a place I want to go that I can't get to, then I'll alter the tuning. I don't alter the tunings just for their own sake. I try to make it solve a problem, I guess is what I do mostly with the alter tuning. Yeah, one more question. Yes? Can I think of a classical guitarist that uses altered tunings? It's much less of a thing in classical guitar playing, for sure. I mean, the thing about classical guitar playing in general is that it's a much more dogmatic way of playing the guitar. Almost any other style, there are very few rules to be broken in the first place. With classical guitar, there tends to be a certain right-hand technique, certain left-hand technique, standard tuning. Don't use your thumb over the top of the neck and stuff like that to finger bass notes. And so there's a lot of don'ts. And so I haven't heard too much of alter tunings for classical guitar players, except for things like this Parkening thing where he uses drop D, and then he even lowers it again to a C. But it's not so much an open tuning, for example. Okay, let's look at. Sorry, very quickly. Let's look at one more unusual new tuning, and then I'll answer your question. Sorry, just to get one more thing in before we run out of time. This is a tuning that is for the very first piece off my very first album, but a lot of people ask about it. So it's worth looking at quickly. It's this tuning. Any guesses what that is? Very good. Who said that? Very good. Good boy. You'll get a candy. F-A-C-G-C-E spells out an F major ninth chord. What the heck's an F major ninth chord? Well, it's F major. There's on the bottom three strings. F-A-C. That's 1, 3, 5, and F. Okay? And then G is the ninth of F. C is the 5 again, and E is the major seventh. So that major seventh is where the major part of the name of the chord comes from. Now, the cool thing about this tuning is that, yes, it is an F chord of some sort, but you don't have to play an F if you don't want to. Okay, this, I guess, is coming back to this quandary again of the limitations of the tunings. This tuning is really cool because, in a way, you can play in a lot of different keys very easily in this tuning. I've written pieces in F, I've written pieces in C, in A minor, and all because the tuning itself is like 3 chords in one. Three chords in one. The bottom 3 notes are F major. What are the top 4 notes? Anybody? Yeah. There's C major, right? C, E, G. That's the triad. Okay? The bottom 3 notes we said were F major. And how about the top 5 notes? A minor 7th. Very good. So right there, you've got kind of 3 places to go, built right into the tuning. Let me find it here. So this F major ninth tuning is the tuning that I played a piece of mine called The First Ride in. And the nice thing about it is that it's actually very close to standard tuning, if you've noticed. The top string doesn't change, it's put. The D string goes down to a C. The A string stays put, and then the E goes up to an F. So you only have to change half the strings, really, and they're all close neighbors to their usual pitches. So again, here's the top 4 strings, the C major. Okay, here's the bottom 3 strings, which make the F major. And then the top 5 strings of that A minor 7th. Now, I use that in the course of the piece. There's a section which ends a lot of the sort of the verses of the piece, where the melody line does this. And over A. And it's a very cool device because you take the same melody line, use different tone centers, it has a different flavor each time, and
all you have to do is just move your thumb ever so slightly to the different bass note, and it's very cool. So you've got not just an open chord tuning, but you've got an open chord tuning with built-in chord places to go to. You've got a built-in 4 chord and a built-in 6 chord for the key of C, because this piece is in the key of C. All right, and it's a bit of a workout for your right hand, this piece, but the left hand is very simple, so it's a very gratifying piece to learn because it sounds like something kind of special, but it's very easy to play compared to some of the other nonsense. It's called The First Ride. Thank you. Just to quickly point out, a lot of people ask about this little thing and this. It's just a little pattern, a harmonic set of harmonics in a pattern. There's kind of like one, two. There's kind of like 3 patterns happening at once. You're starting on string number 2 and then alternating sort of up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, like this. So it's like 2, 1, 3, 2, 4, 3, 5, 4 in terms of strings. And I'm just alternating here between these two fingers to do it. Then you're also alternating back and forth between fret 5 and fret 7 on each of those strings. So it's like 5, 7, 5, 7, 5, 7, 5. And then what's the other part of the pattern? There's that, the frets, the strings, the fingers. I guess that's it. And then I do it again. I do it again at 7 and 12, the exact same thing. Okay? And it's just merely a matter of practice to get it up to speed. You know, and then there's that, you know, like the Bruce Cockburn trick where you play a lot of kind of patterny harmonic patterns like that. You know, that kind of thing. But again, it's a lot of this and a lot of this, instead of a very roll kind of thing. You know, this is called a roll, I guess, and this is just a back and forth between 1 and 2. Okay, quick questions about that one? Sorry, you had a question. I should get back to you. Okay, the question had to do with melodic writing. The first part of the question was that I'm very rhythmic in my playing, but also there's a certain style to the melodic writing. I guess we all kind of have a compositional fingerprint, I guess. You know, like when I hear different players, for example, on the guitar, even if I can't tell from the actual sort of the tone quality they're getting, very often I can tell by the style of writing who it is, because people tend to find whatever it is that they like about writing in general, and they tend to, mostly because I think most solo guitar playing suffers most often from a kind of over-cerebral, over-complicated kind of approach, and very often it's a reliance on patterny kinds of things, getting into a very unusual tuning, like perhaps that C minor tuning, and sort of getting into arpeggio patterns, and just sort of letting the unusualness of the intervallic relationships among the strings to sort of make up a melody without putting in a lot of lyricism into it. So, I mean, I do sing as well, so I try to write pieces of music. Usually I try to make the melodies singable so that at least they stick with you somehow, and then make people want to listen to you, because it's usually a good reason to if the melodies are memorable. So I think of my writing as very simple. I think of the playing perhaps as being at an unusual kind of level. Like, I don't know if it's a high level or a low level. It's just this I have to be able to listen to the melodies as well. So I guess, it's got to do with that overall sense. When it comes to lateral writing, or I guess you're thinking, maybe by that you mean sort of having melodies that are less this like this, and maybe are more angular and sort of go. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The question has to do with whether the actual movement to achieve melody and stuff like that is as a result of the tuning. I think very often it is. The tuning sometimes facilitates certain kinds of melodic writing just by combining fingered notes with open strings and playing them in certain. For example, there's another piece that's in a very different tuning. I can't really illustrate it, where I do a very patterny thing. Like, it'll sound very weird in this tuning. It'll sound like what's called bug music, where you play a piece in the wrong tuning. But this kind of pattern, that kind of thing. It's one of the few bad notes in there, isn't it? Oh. Oh, that's kind of neat. Anyway, I'll have to work that into it. But anyway, there are moves like that sometimes I'll rely on to get this kind of interesting cascading effect in the melody. Anyway, there's a lot of different ways of doing it. Yes? Yeah, I'm working publications out of Ottawa. I'm not sure when the book's going to come out, but and it'll have more transcriptions in it. It'll probably have an extra 6 or 7 tunes in it, including tunes off the new album. So that'll probably be available in a more national way than the last book was. Yes. This is a Sunrise pickup here. I use two pickups. I use a magnetic in the sound hole, it's the Sunrise, and I use a piezo crystal pickup, which is actually not a saddle pickup. Personally, I feel that the saddle pickups are a little crunchy, too crunchy sounding. So mine is actually a disc that's mounted on the bridge plate inside the guitar. It's epoxied right on, so that you actually get the top vibration more than just the saddle crunch. You know, preamp it into a little mixer through a chorus and into the reverb. I click the chorus in only occasionally. The magnetic I only use as a bass booster. I roll all the highs off it through an EQ. Here, I'll let you hear it all by itself. It's just a hum, really. There's the two of them together. The magnetic sort of gives a bit more of what the piezo tends to lack, which is bottom end. And then I run them through a little bit of chorus, a little bit of reverb into the board, and it's really simple. And that's what I do in terms of gear. Let's take two more questions and call it a day. Yes. Sort of strong, bright attack that I like. What I've found is that as my playing has developed, I've injected a lot more energy level into the playing, and it ends up being a lot more of a crowd-pleasing kind of style. You know, to me, that's always I'm always worried about paying the mortgage and stuff. So it's like that has to have something to do with it if you're going to be a popular musician, right? So I think that's why the thumb pick gives me gives me a lot of upper partials in the bottom end, which when you play without it, you lose, right? You get a lot of the low hum, but you don't get the high dong sound. Right. The built-up nail thing would help if I had any classical chops at all, which I don't. And classical players are really good about putting their thumb back like that, and I'm too uncoordinated to do that. So I rely on a thumb pick, which is a good cheater way of doing it. Okay, one more question. How would I suggest amplifying classical guitar? Okay, piezo pickups are, I guess, the most acoustic sounding way of reinforcing your acoustic sound. There's a lot of new pickups on the market. I've heard of this thing called the Fishman Matrix, which I've never tried yet, but again, it's another saddle-mounted pickup, but there's supposed to be something different about it. I've heard one demoed at a festival one time. Harvey Reid uses one, and I was impressed, actually. I thought it sounded like he had a microphone in front of his guitar, but it was a pickup. So something like that might work really well on a classical guitar. Again, it's saddle-mounted. It goes right underneath your saddle, and sometimes you have to adjust your saddle a little bit, like get it shaved or something, so that your action doesn't get too high. Then, other than that, a system like what I'm using, which is an actual disc affixed to the inside of the top, would work in the same way that it does on the steel string, on this particular steel string. And then you get the top vibration. As long as you get anything like a piezo crystal pickup will give you that. A magnetic obviously would not work on a classical because you've got nylon strings. I mean, it would work a little bit on the wound strings, but that would be it. And the other problem too is I find classical guitars, the tone suffers more when you reinforce the sound in a classical than it does on a steel string. Steel string guitars are just that, you know, they've got that bright, brassy sound. The classical guitar starts developing a very nasal kind of sound when you start amplifying it, and it's a very problematic thing. That's why, for example, Norbert Kraft invested $3,000 in a really good microphone that he just puts in front of his guitar if he needs one. And as classical players tend to be stationary, so that the microphone would work really well. I know Norbert Kraft, yeah, he's a very fine player. Yeah, the mic inside the guitar trick works really well at not too loud volumes. My background is as a rock and roll player, so I used to play a lot of electric guitar, screaming amps and all this kind of stuff, and then my hearing started to suffer, so I got right back into the acoustic thing because it was a little. But anyway, the leftover of that is that when I play on stage, I usually have my monitors sort of right in front of me, and I have them up really loud so that I don't play so hard that I overdo it, and then I can sort of lean back a little bit. In my case, microphones wouldn't work because there would be too much of a feedback problem. I've tried it, and that the monitor problem tends to be a little too exaggerated. But for classical players, I think that the microphone inside the guitar is probably the best solution if you don't want to use an external microphone. And there are a lot of good systems on the market right now that will give you probably the truest reproduction. But then again, you're still miking the inside of the instrument as opposed to the outside. So there's that kind of perspective weirdness, you know? It's like you're inside the instrument instead of outside of it. So is that a good thing? You know, maybe, maybe not. Okay. But okay, well, this has been great, and you've been a very intelligent, very fun audience to be with.